Okay, so as we noted yesterday, what we're going to do is look back at the Gemara again, and then we're going to continue with the Code of Jewish Law, referencing that Gemara specifically.
We're 8 lines from the middle, skinny here at bottom.
I'll take your word for it. Okay. Yeah, Tanan Hassam. So we finished discussing what constitutes the confessional prayer. And essentially the essence is, I have sinned. That's the essence of it. And then there is the other issue, which is it's best to detail the sins. Then there is the added other prayers of supplication, which we mentioned. And then we also discussed, both in the Gemara and the Halacha, when is the primary time for confession. 2 views, whether it's at the beginning of Yom Kippur, namely the evening service, the first of the night of Yom Kippur after Kol Nidrei, or just before Kol Nidrei starts. And we saw that the Halacha is, that the primary confession is at the night of Yom Kippur. But nonetheless, the Alter Rebbe suggested that one should nonetheless add the other confession just before Kol Nidrei to cover that view as well. But nonetheless, the Gemara concludes, and the Halacha does as well, nonetheless, we should say confession at every prayer during Yom Kippur, lest, God forbid, we sin since last prayer. And likewise, we should do a confession before our meal on the afternoon of Yom Kippur, lest the meal cause drunkenness and we won't be able to properly confess later that night. Those are the halachas we covered, both in the Gemara and in the Shulchan Aruch. Now the Gemara gets into, first of all, this extra prayer we just mentioned. And then we're going to get into the nature of the bracha itself, the nature of confession itself vis-a-vis its position within the context of the blessings of the prayer. Because so far all we had was that the Chazan puts it into his bracha, into one of the brachas of Shemona Esrei, the last one just before Moedim, whereas a person who's saying Shemona Esrei in the undertone before the Chazan says the confession after the prayer is done, before he takes 3 steps back, which would be in our Siddur before that paragraph beginning with the words L'kai Nitzar. But in a moment we're going to get into the nature of the relationship between confession and the blessings of prayer. And there's going to be 2 views of how to learn the Gemara, and we'll see the Halacha takes one of them, even though practically speaking, the law still applies the same way in some sense, as we'll see. Okay. So, Tanan Hassam, we learned over there, with respect to this 5th prayer that we just mentioned before, because we said before you're supposed to do confession, all 5 prayers of Yom Kippur, this 5th prayer is an anomaly. So let's see what this is. So the Gemara, Tanan Hassam, we learned over there, elsewhere. I believe it's in Tainus, right? Zion, it's in Tainus, yes. So Tanan Hassam, we learned over there in the tractate Tainus, there are 3 times a year when Kohen Noisin is Kapeyen, when the Kohen raise up their hands, literally that's what it means, Noisin is Kapeyen, they raise up their hands, means they give the priestly benedictions. Okay, this is not the subject of our discussion, but the statement is only partial, considering the fact that when the Mishnah says 3 times a year, when the Mishnah here says 3 times a year, it means the 3 holidays throughout the year. But the truth is in the temple times they did it every single day. And in some communities in Eretz Yisrael, they actually do it every single day. Sfardim until today. The Alter Rebbe said that if he had the capacity, he would do it every day, even in diaspora. And the fact that the Ashkenazim in diaspora don't do it is because there are more rights that we are too stressed out by our persecution, and if we don't have the headspace or the joy of Berachas Kohanim. That's what he writes. So, but nonetheless, this is what the statement is. 3 times a year, the Kohen does the Berachas Kohanim.
No, not 3 times. It's 4 times. It's 3 times a year before individual prayers. They do it the whole year.
Sorry? No, B'Shlosh Prakam Bashana, 3 times a year.
Yeah, but 4 times. That's the point.
Avot Pam B'Yom. Yes, 3 times. Yes, 4 times in that day, but it's only 3 days a year. In their
3 events, fast days.
Right, but it's not every single day, which is different than what we have. Halacha. Either way, it's different. We'll see.
The key that we should hear is that that's 4 times a day or less.
I understand that. But this idea that it's only 3 occasions of the year is not fully in the halacha. That's all I'm saying. Okay, specifically, 4 times on those 3 occasions, namely Shachris, the morning prayer, the Musaf prayer, the additional prayer for that occasion, the Mincha, the afternoon prayer, and the closing of the gates, meaning that fourth prayer called Ne'ilah. So which means that there are 3 times a year when there's 5 prayers, or 3 different types of. I mentioned before 3 times a year as in 3 holidays. Incorrect. My apologies. Sorry. Okay, we'll leave that aside. We're going to leave that aside. Well, let's read what the Gemara says. Yes, we're going to get to all that, but we'll leave that aside anyway for now. So let's revisit this again. Explain this. 3 occasions a year in which there are 5 prayers during that day: Ma'ariv, Shachas, Musaf, Mincha, Ne'ilah, and the Berachas Kohanim happens 4 out of those 5 prayers, meaning all the day prayers, rather than the Ma'ariv the night before, but Shachas, Musaf, Mincha, Ne'ilah. Now the Elahain, these are the 3 times a year, the 3 occasions a year when this happens. Which could mean, I guess, what Rabbi Gimple is saying is that this is 3 occasions a year when it happens 4 times, but every single day it happens 1 time. Maybe that's what the Mishnah means here? Yeah. So it's only a partial statement, not to be confused with a dispute. It's just that it's a partial statement. Yes? Yeah. Okay, so I guess that's a better way of reading it. So, says the Gemara, these are the 3 occasions in the year when there are 4 times a day that the Kohen raises his hands in Berachas Kohanim. Number 1, Taniyas, anytime there's a fast day, which, as you noted, the Gemara in Tainus discusses the fact that on a fast day, there is no Musaf, so why are we adding the 4th time? But nonetheless, the Ma'amodos are when the Kohen is in the temple. Right, once a year, I believe, each family has a turn for a week. Yes, once a year, each family gets a week-long service in the temple, and during that week, they would do Berachas Kohanim 4 times a day. And then, Yom Kippurim and Yom Kippur. So here's the source that Yom Kippur has, this extra prayer called Ne'ilah Sha'arim, which literally translates as closing of the gates. Closing of the gates, because it was the time when they closed the gates in the temple for the closing the day service. So the Gemara therefore asks, my Ne'ilah Sha'arim, what is this closing of the gates? Because it's another prayer, clearly, when the Kohen is raising his hands to do Berachas Kohanim. So Rav says, it's an actually additional 5th full prayer, which is our experience, at least on Yom Kippur, we have this 5th prayer. For Shmuel says it's not a whole entire prayer. It's just this other paragraph of supplication during which the Kohen would raise his hands and do Berachas Kohanim. Namely, a paragraph which begins with the words Ma'anu Mechayenu, which we actually read on Yom Kippur. But Shmuel is saying it's not a full whole prayer. Whereas Rav says it's a full whole prayer. Now, Meisah, the Gemara challenges Shmuel's opinion, Shmuel's view, by citing another Mishnaic age text which reads, Yom Kippurim, on the day of Yom Kippur, the night before Yom Kippur, Ma'ariv, Mispalel Sheva, one prays the Amidah with 7 blessings. As opposed to the 19 we do every day, there's 7 blessings. 3 praise at the beginning, 3 thanks at the end, which are universal to any time we do Amidah. There's always the first 3 brachas are the same. Magen Avraham, Hakel HaKadosh, and then at the end, Moedim, Sim Shalom, etc. Those prayers, let's say Moedim, Sim Shalom, which are all 3 the same, no matter what the prayer is. That's a total of 6. And then there's a 7th one, the blessing in the middle, which during the weekday is a bunch of requests. We have a bunch of blessings and requests in the middle during the weekday. On a holiday, we have 1 blessing that talks about the theme of the day, and therefore totaling 7. Is that clear? Okay. So then, during those 7, you do the confessional, as we described in the last few days. The Shachas in the morning again, Mispal Sheva again, the morning service again has 7 brachas. Misvaden, one does confession during those 7. But Musaf, the additional prayer of Musaf, Mispal Sheva, again you have 7 blessings. Misvaden, you do confession there too. The Mincha in the afternoon prayer, Mispal Sheva, you do 7. Misvaden, you do confession. But Ne'ilah, during Ne'ilah, Mispal Sheva, you daven 7 blessings. Misvaden, you say confession. Proof number 1 that Ne'ilah is an actual full other prayer. Because the Mishnah indicates you do 7 blessings and Misvaden, and you do confession. And the Gemara says, okay, the exact wording of the Gemara is up for question, but let's read the Gemara as it's written here. Tanoihi, and there's another dispute, the Tanya, that we learned in a different brisa, and these disputants both will disagree with Shmuel's view that Ne'ilah is simply a supplication of man. What's the dispute? The Tanya, for we learned Yom Kippurim, Yom Kippur at night, meaning Yom Kippur at night, by the Ne'ilah time, Mispal Sheva, you do 7 full blessings, Misvada, and you confess, and you conclude, you make the closing bracha on vidoy. So exactly what this Gemara means is not exactly clear, and you see Rashi brings two different versions to this Gemara, but just explain one way which is much simpler, which is as follows. When you confess, when you do a bracha in general, in Shemona Esrei, right, so you have Rafa'inu, let's say, a whole blessing for healing, then you conclude, Baruch Atah Hashem, blessed are you God our Lord, Reifei, the one who heals all flesh and he's wondrous in his doings. And then the same thing with the next bracha of Geula, you see Baruch Hashem Gal Yisrael. Every bracha concludes with a blessed are you God our Lord, and then a small little phrasing that encapsulates the whole bracha. And therefore, Rabbi Meir says, these are the words of Rabbi Meir. So Rabbi Meir says that when you conclude the bracha, when you finish saying vidu, when you finish saying confession, you do the same thing. Baruch Atah Hashem, blessed are you, God our Lord. Salchan Yisrael, the one who gives forgiveness to Israel. In other words, you turn the confession into a blessing. One way of understanding this Gemara. Or another way of understanding this Gemara is that when you do your confession in your prayer, you add Baruch Atah Hashem Mekadesh Yisrael, Ata Salchan Yisrael Mekadesh Yisrael, which means the blessing in which you are inserting the confession, which is the description of the holiness of the day, and therefore the concluding blessing Baruch Hashem has a recap of the whole thing, in which you say Mekadesh Yisrael, Mekadesh Hayoim, blessing the day and the Jews. You should add there also Salchan, the one who is forgiving, because the content of the blessing became more. You see the two different versions? Do you make it an individual bracha? Do you make it like another bracha, which would mean you have 8 total blessings? 7 plus a blessing for confession. And you conclude, Baruch Atah Hashem, blessed are you God our Lord, the one who forgives. One version of understanding this Gemara. Another version of understanding this Gemara is that the blessing in which you inserted your confession, in your conclusion of that blessing, you should add some mention of forgiveness. Not that you're adding another blessing, but you're just adding a mention. Different ways of reading this Gemara. And it also changes whether the Mishnah is referring specifically to just Ne'ilah or is it speaking to all 5. But let's just leave it for that, because when we see the halacha, it's going to really make no difference. Because the end is, we do not turn vidu into another bracha. And we do say at the end, we do say in Mekadesh Yisrael, we say, Ata Salchan Yisrael, you are the one who forgives Israel. And we say in Mekadesh, what's the language in Yom Kippur? I can't remember this, but it's Ata Malchon Yisrael, you're the one who forgives Israel. Mekadesh Yisrael, you sanctify Israel. And the Yoma is a Karn, the day of remembrance. That's for Rosh Hashanah, and it's Yom Kippurim. So we do mention in that closing bracha forgiveness. So the halacha remains the same, either which way you learn the Gemara. Just the phrasing of the way the Shulchan Aruch is going to be written follows one version of the Gemara versus another. Okay, these are the words of Rameir. Chacham say, Mispal Sheva, you do 7 blessings during your Ilah. And if you want to conclude the confessional prayer with this added Baruch Atah Hashem, thank you for being forgiving, then Chaisim, you can do so. But the point, yeah? So Rameir says you have to, Chacham say you could do if you want to, depending on which reading you're talking about, either way.
No,
Yeah.
but for me to simplify this, so I understand this
Yeah.
correctly. So I'm asking for a blessing because I am confessing my sin.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's
Okay, so the word blessing is a very weak translation of the word bracha. Because when we say blessing, what we think of is you bestowing something on me. But the word bracha in Hebrew, which is often translated as blessing, really just means supplication. So it could be a praise, it could be an acknowledgement, it could be gratitude. It's not exclusively like you bestowing some kindness upon me, as we would say in English. Right? In other words, for example, you say, blessed are you God our Lord, who's commanded us to put on tefillin. Not asking me to give me anything. But we call that in Hebrew a bracha, which we translate into English as blessing. But it's more a acknowledgement, gratitude. Right? So when I say that we're concluding with a blessing, blessed are you God our Lord, who forgives us, it's not so much a request as much as it is a acknowledgement of gratitude that you are providing us opportunity for confession and forgiveness. Praise, yeah. But all of those things are incorporated into one word, bracha, which I guess better, more accurately translated as supplication. And supplication could be a praise, could be a request, could be a gratitude, could be all kinds of things which indicate a lowly creature talking to the Creator.
right.
In some form.
So it could translated as please acknowledge my confession.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Or please acknowledge my confession, or thank you for the opportunity for providing confession. Something like that.
Okay, got it.
Okay. All to say that whether you're of the view like a mayor, which says that the confessional prayer ought to have a concluding blessing, or you're of the view of Chachamim, which say only if you want to, you can have a concluding blessing. Either way, to Yufta de Shmuel, this contradicts Shmuel's view, which said that Ne'ilah is nothing other than a small supplication paragraph, but not a full-on blessing, not a full Amidah with Baruch Atah Hashem. Because whether you agree with your mayor that you should conclude with a blessing after your confession, or whether you shouldn't, they both agree and have stated explicitly that during the closing of your of Yom Kippur, during Elul, you have to make 7 blessings, a full Amidah. And therefore, to Yufta de Shmuel, this is a contradiction to Shmuel's view, and indeed the Gemara concludes to Yufta, this is indeed a refutation to his view. Okay, we have a few minutes left, but I want to stop over here so that we can do the Shulchan Aruch properly tomorrow. Okay, so this is the background for the Shulchan Aruch that's going to come tomorrow. Have a wonderful day, everybody.